Hello and welcome to Cinema Eclectica, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. I'm Graham, and this week I've been joined by Tim.
Yeah.
Mick.
Hello.
And Rob.
Heidi, hi. I don't want to be like those people and just say the same thing. It seems so uncreative.
So you went with 80s sitcom instead.
Yeah.
You don't want to be one of those people who just says hello.
Yeah.
So last year.
Like.
But yes, later on in the show we have a double bill for fans of Luc Besson, with Off the Shelf taking a look at The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc, and The Fifth Element.
That's right.
But before that, we have the results of our last Directors Lottery feature, where we have a big master list of directors we're interested in. We pick them out at random, and we do a film from their back catalogue. And in this case, it was Toshiro Matsumoto, whose back catalogue is not voluminous, I think it would be fair to say.
And on evidence of this week's Director's Lottery, I'm probably going to have to go through that Director's Lottery list and, maybe check it twice.
I must admit, I think your Director's Lottery is less random than you claim it to be.
Oh.
Because whenever I appear on an episode that's got a Director's Lottery, it's a complete mind of a film.
Yes.
Take it up with random.org.
Yeah.
No,
Take it up with fate.
no. I think what happens is that Graham sits there and goes, "Mick's going to be on that show, so roll again."
Yeah, let's
No.
wind Mick up.
No, that's far too mainstream. Roll again.
Because we could have gone with Demons, his samurai film, or we could have gone with one of the other two, which no one has ever seen, ever. But instead we went with the one that anyone's ever heard of, which is Funeral Parade of Roses, which I will now attempt to summarise. Get me.
Go for it.
So there's a bar in Japan called Bar Genet, named after Jean Genet, the pioneer of queer literature. The reigning madame, who is, I guess it would be fair to say, kind of like a drag queen. They refer to themselves frequently as gay boys, which I think is not an idiom that translates outside of Japan. She begins to suspect that the bar's owner, Gonda, her boyfriend, is having an affair with an up-and-coming young hostess called Eddie, played by Peter, a famous female impersonator and comedian in Japan, who also played the role of the fool in Akira Kurosawa's version of King Lear. And this turns out to be the case. Eddie is planning to move up the ladder, and somehow that plot, which is very similar, I would say, to the plot of, say, Showgirls, ends up being expressed in a way that is genuinely hallucinatory.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good summary. I mean, is that the end of the summary?
That's as far as I can get.
Yeah. The other, you could also summarise it as being a gender-swapped retelling of Oedipus Rex.
Yeah.
I have heard it described like this, but apart from one very nasty bit at the end, I have never quite been clear on that. Would you like to educate me, Tim?
No, I wouldn't.
Fair enough.
No, I
Okay.
agree with you, really. I agree with you, really. It's like a slight thing. It's a sort of influence, or more almost of a kind of reference. There are aspects of the story that seem to overlap a bit,
Ooh.
to do with the kind of horrifying coincidence of the mother and the father and the sort of family relationships in the film. But whether you could actually really say it has much kind of in parallel apart from that, but it also chops around. It's in some cases rather difficult to follow because it does jump around into flashback quite a bit, doesn't it?
Yes, and
In some
document-
cases, it's difficult to follow.
I mean, particularly the nighttime footage of what appears to be Tokyo's rapidly growing street sport, international kick the inflatable armchair.
Yeah.
What, you've never played?
Would that I could get hold of an inflatable armchair?
I genuinely thought you were going to say there are some points where it's hard to follow, like the point from the start to somewhere around 1 hour 45 minutes in.
And those bits where, on a whim, it just decides to be a documentary for a bit.
And there are the bits where people talk and sort of animated speech bubbles come out of their mouth. That bit.
Yeah. Now,
There's also the fast-forwarded slapstick sequences of fighting.
Yes. Actually, that bit where they're fighting in the street, I think they just forgot their armchair.
Well, I was going to ask if anyone could enlighten me about the significance of chairs, because if you remember at the start, there was a character who lifting up a chair, was challenged to lift up a chair with one hand. There was the inflatable armchair that was kicked around in the street. There was like a flash to a shot of a character in a wheelchair, but I never worked out what it meant. Why were there so many chairs?
I would love to enlighten you on the symbolism of chairs, but I cannot.
Yeah, okay. But to the listeners should be aware that there's a lot of kind of incidental kind of montage of symbols and images used in the movie. And like, for example, there's two characters who have a kind of fight with each other, like a sort of argument row turning into a physical fight. And it's not even clear exactly how much of it really happens as a physical fight, because it's expressed as like high-speed slapstick comedy, but it's also expressed as them dressed as cowboys firing little fake pop guns at each other.
Yeah. Now, would it help contextualize this film if I said it was a key influence on A Clockwork Orange?
Nope.
Fair enough.
Well,
Not in the slightest.
Some of the imagery, I can see it being. I can see some of the imagery being inspirational for Clockwork Orange. I'm also intrigued that he's reused some of this footage in a previous film entitled some of the footage is reused from a previous film.
I was going to say that would be an achievement to reuse the footage in a previous film.
The film is very achronologically edited. It's possible that he managed to edit it before it was shot.
Absolutely, yeah. For My Crushed Right Eye contains some of the footage from this film, which might explain some of the eye-related metaphor. Obviously, there's some ties into the Oedipus Rex stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
And the other thing is that the main thing for me that tied into Oedipus Rex was the incest subplot, which they seemed to be dragging out the reveal of, but I actually cottoned onto quite early on.
Right. Yeah.
One thing that really needs to be said about this, a few things. One, it's Japanese New Wave, and that was kind of a wild west. It's very much a counterpoint to French New Wave. Watching this, I was thinking of Godard throughout all of it, and it's no surprise that I hate Godard either. But it is what it is.
Well,
another thing is, it's a Japanese movie.
Yeah.
And Japan is a very conservative, by the rules nation. Having a movie in the 1960s, which I think there was still a spectre of American occupation hanging over them then, or it was on its way out.
Yeah.
And to have them at their most Japaneseness, because when you're occupied, you really double down on your national identity, I guess.
Yeah.
And for them to produce, I mean, given the movies that they definitely did double down on the Japaneseness, as well as having lots of jazz bars in movies, which I don't recall there being in this. But yeah, the fact that this was made in that era,
yeah,
when you've got other movies by people like Seijun Suzuki, who's like subverting genre gangster movies, or what's some of the other ones? He did Battle Royale. His name's
Kinshi Fukasaku.
Yeah, he was doing some gangster movies and movies about racism. So this is even within like Japanese New Wave, this doesn't really fit.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it has elements in it that are kind of socially relevant, but mostly, apart from the sort of queer themes, it's on quite an allegorical level. You could read it as later being like the old guard of Japanese society being undercut by someone like Peter, but they are both such disruptive presences, and the film exists with such a minute baseline of reality anyway, that I'm not sure how much you could really say that.
The other thing is that there's kind of a Western influence quite prominent in that you have a lot of characters kind of dressed up as sort of Western figures. You have someone dressed as Che Guevara. You have a John Lennon. I think I spotted a kind of Andy Warhol figure in there as well.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be Che Guevara. I just thought it was a random beard guy.
No, because I think I think the Che Guevara poster was on the wall, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah.
That's how you know it's an art house movie. There's a random beard guy in the street eating baguettes for no reason.
I mean, if we
during the night, he had 2 of them as well. Greedy.
I mean, given that, maybe in a way it surprised me. I mean, this is my first time through for this one, and it surprised me in a way how kind of unconservative it was, and that it was quite kind of liberal in how much kind of sex and swearing and nudity there was in it, really.
I'm not sure whether it's the first time we see Eddie, because my brain is scrambled after watching this, but there is a very memorable scene where Eddie takes the most indulgently sensuous shower outside of a 1990s shampoo commercial.
Yeah. There's a surprising amount of nudity, some of it completely in kind of imaginary events, really. Although, I don't know, you don't actually get full frontal nudity in it, do you? I don't think. But it also has very shocking violence in...
I don't think so.
The violence in 1 or 2 scenes is kind of horrifying,
yes.
Really. I mean, proper sort of gory knife stabbings. But,
yes.
Yeah.
I've got
also a fair bit of drugs.
Oh, yeah.
There's a very fine stoner scene.
Yeah. Stoner and other drugs too, I think. It's, so there's not terribly much. I mean, once you've got all that and incest, I suppose you could have done cannibalism. I don't know if there's much beyond that's missing from it. Really, it's not made an attempt at.
Cannibalism and necrophilia, I think, are the things that possibly bestiality are missing.
Yeah,
cannibal, necrophilia, and Morris dancing.
Yeah. If you're trying to get all the taboos into one film.
Yeah. But I've got to admit, my overall impression was to not really be quite persuaded by this. I know it has a very good reputation, and all of the characteristics we've described about how much it fits into, as part of Japanese New Wave and all of the strange kind of hallucinatory qualities. I have to admit to thinking at times it almost went too far, and it was kind of like watching a sort of parody film that you would see as a sketch on a TV sketch show or something like that. It's like if you tried to imagine a mockery of this type of movie, it would really not be that different. But and
I think that happens with a lot of French New Wave stuff as well, largely because those sketches are often parodying those exact films.
Yeah. And obviously it's just... It's something where the idea that it would have something that would be too absurd is just not something that really bothers them in a way. You can have some truly ludicrous stuff happening entirely kind of imaginary and just inserted as kind of montage. And it was also doing a lot of kind of violent strobe lighting and long sequences that you couldn't exactly call animation, but were just kind of montage of flickering images. But
it's very swinging 60s, isn't it?
Yeah, but the other thing is that on terms of the actual kind of symbolism of the movie, with Eddie's kind of dual role as a transgender or transvestite person in this community, they make a lot about the idea of people wearing different masks. The voiceover narration is about, everyone wears a mask all the time, and some people wear, 2 masks, or they're born wearing a mask, and so on, that kind of thing. And it's this is obviously an important bit of symbolism for the plot of the movie, which involves kind of characters learning more about each other's real identities. And there's a kind of recurring image of a person who's a photograph with the faces burned out by cigarettes. Yeah,
yes,
that's right. Yeah. But despite this, it mostly, when it had this kind of symbolism, it achieved it by just kind of talking about it at the viewer, but at the audience in voiceover, or things like the characters visiting an art exhibit where there's loads of discussion of this kind of subtext, or rather these kind of symbols and metaphors.
Now you see, I thought that the discussion in the art gallery was quite resonant for the times we're living in, because they sat in opposite corners, not talking directly at each other. I mean, give them a face covering each, and they're sorted.
Yeah.
Well, like he says, everyone's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And there were, in fact, people wearing kind of like hygiene face masks or something, or possibly for like urban pollution and stuff like that.
That's just
was
something to do in Japan. It's a polite thing, so they don't, if they're ill, they don't shout over people.
Yeah.
So
no, there was
that's why they do that.
There was also those people getting off a train or a tram or a bus or something in a kind of parade.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand this. I didn't understand the significance of that.
And one was pretending to be an elephant.
Well, one of them was in like a proper
trunk stuck in a box,
a kind of strange sort of plague doctor kind of mask or something with a kind of wartime gas mask drum on it as well. And I couldn't work out what on earth all that was supposed to be about, really, apart from just generally increasing the number of like images of masks in the movie.
Maybe in a film that tried to address as many taboos as it could, maybe that character symbolised the genuine love and affection that someone can have with a Henry Hoover.
Yes.
There's a lot of Japanese theatre is based around masks, so and it is quite theatrical. So maybe there's some sort of through line.
That's also.
I'm not complaining about the actual presence of the imagery, just that they were rather heavy-handed in a way in how it was inserted into the movie.
Well, I think the thing that I approach like 1960s radical cinema in a certain way, and I approach Japanese cinema in a certain way, basically with a lot of stuff from the Japanese or the French or the Czech New Wave, a lot of it does tend towards agitprop, and they wanted to break down this idea of the sort of well-made drama where you have a story with characters and there's subtext beneath it. They wanted the subtext to break through the surface. So I think that's fine. I think in terms of the other issues raised, one of my big problems coming to Japanese cinema, even when it's something perfectly naturalistic like Ozu, is that I know jack about Japan. So I sort of prepare myself for quite a lot of it to go over my head. And there are bits of Funeral Parade of Roses which I just appreciated as a pure visceral experience, and personally I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
and I've been watching like Japanese movies of all sorts since I was about 16, and honestly most of this went over my head anyway, so
fair enough.
But on the other hand,
it doesn't really matter.
On the other hand, a lot of bits of it seemed, like I say, kind of surprisingly Western or kind of swinging 60s London sort of scene. You know, there's a lot of scenes in it where you could just say, oh, this was just set in London in the 60s, and it wouldn't be all that different, really. And
there appears to be a lot of spasmodic fitting to Atlantic Records.
Yes.
It's like that. It's like that futuristic dancing in Ikari XB1.
Oh man, you
I
can't
do love a good
XB1
1960s dance scene.
Yeah, so great.
But I mean, I've got to say, and again, a lot of this is to do with not understanding Japanese culture the way that a Japanese person will, and certainly not the way that a 1960s Japanese person will. But I actually enjoyed is probably the wrong word. But for all it messed with my head, and I believe it's still messing with my head in certain scenes, I thought the shots that were purely sort of filmic shots were shot really, really well.
Yeah. I think it looks gorgeous.
It has. In fact, at first, I thought I'd been sent the wrong file.
Right.
I'd never do that.
Yeah.
When the opening shot starts of the couple, I thought someone had sent me a black and white copy of the George Michael "I Want Your Sex" video.
Well, that's probably another masterpiece of cinema which it's been an influence on. I also noticed that this landmark in 20th century radical cinema features a scene of female presenting characters standing at the men's urinals, much like that 21st century masterpiece of radical cinema, The Video for Boys by Lizzo.
Yeah.
If I was going to send you the wrong thing, Mick, it'd be something that you actually like. So,
here we go. Rob's delved into his list of guilty pleasures and thought, I'll confuse Mick.
Yeah. This is a criticism and a complaint, but it's the sort of movie you watch in an art gallery. And that says everything about the sort of person I am. I just don't jive with this style of abrasive, transgressive cinema.
I think if you take out some of the bits that Tim was talking about earlier, the voiceover bits and the weird
wall bashes.
Yeah, the weird animation bits and stuff. If you take purely just the cinematic bits and actually put them into a logical story order, I think it's a cracking film. I think the other bits, you probably need to be there in 1960s Tokyo, living that life to understand what all the symbology is supposed to represent.
I would say that if you took out all of the documentary elements and if you took out like the mock animated sequences and some of the bits where they break the fourth wall, then you're no fun. What's wrong with you?
I mean, it might just be that it was... although, a lot of that stuff is kind of enjoyable, it's just that it felt sort of weirdly heavy-handed, and I wonder if it's just that it's surprisingly modern, possibly reflecting the fact that it was, it was more kind of revolutionary at the time, and it's... Nevertheless, it's some kind of techniques that kind of, even the slipping in and out of the sort of documentary interview style, which actually goes right. It kind of goes from just interviewing the characters up to the level of interviewing the actors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Which, again, is back to that sort of theme of masks and performance.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it almost but doesn't quite pull off that idea of the film within a film within a film.
How many layers deep does it go? Yeah, I think it goes to maybe down to like the third layer, possibly.
We did Inception last week, and this is just
so what would our kind of conclusion be, or what direction we push this in? I don't know if anyone's going to have even understood what the experience is like from what we talked about so far.
I don't know.
I mean, can I go away, not watch the film again, and come back to you in maybe 12 to 18 months' time?
Yes, that seems like an acceptable length of time. We will be charging interest on your account during that period, and you will be asked to have at least 14% more of an opinion.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's all right, because 14% of nothing.
is 14 more.
I personally loved it, but I'm a sucker for this shit. I find anything that has a kind of Brechtian or metafictional or even just vaguely layered approach exciting, and it reminds me that there was a time when going to see an experimental art movie meant you were going to see something really fast and poppy and trashy and angry and cool, and I love that.
What I think about this is like the final year project of a media student who's going to go on and do great things later.
Ooh, I don't know.
How much, man?
I don't know how that seems pretty harsh. Yeah, how much better do you expect it to get, or how much more extreme do you expect it to get? Or do you think it's gonna need to be mellowed out later?
No, I mean great things in terms of a sort of commercial success type,
I don't know if we can do any better than Graham's recommendation just then of this kind of thing. You simply don't have to understand it in order to enjoy it, I don't think, really. Not all of it, anyway.
Yeah, but that's what Graham does. Graham champions the films that only 4 people watch, and they're on this podcast.
Usually the good movies, though. This is one of these things where I have a real hard time coming to terms with the fact that something's got a... Well, I've got a history anyway, I should say, of movies that are like legendary, and I watch them and think, what was that all about? That's not worthy of the reputation. I've done it more times than I care to admit. There was the Samurai is probably the biggest example of that I've done. This is a very, very different movie, but at the same time, I was asking the question how much of its reputation is due to the transgressive nature of making a movie about transvestites in Japan in the 1960s, and how much of it was to do with the fact that what the movie actually is. And I fell more on the first part than the second part, unfortunately, and I found it incredibly tedious, but, you know, there's got to be some contrary voice in this group, I guess.
Completely, yes.
Whereas, I think I find myself somewhere in the middle, because I was unaware of its legendary reputation, and went into it really not having a clue what to expect.
I mean, I just found
Came out the other end not completely disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my approach as well, of saying it's enough of a kind of crazy montage of images, and some of them are more kind of effective and resonant than others. But on the other hand, there's so many sort of scattered bits in it where I didn't really understand what it meant. Like the bit about all those bits about armchairs. You know, so if anyone comes up with what the interpretation of that is supposed to be, then...
yeah, please, write in. Yeah.
I know this is kind of not going to work, but recommendations to go with it?
Oh, man, I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
I've got one.
LSD?
I've got one. It's a Japanese movie. It's Mizoguchi's last movie.
Oh.
It's called Streets of Shame.
Right.
It's... I think I've got the right title anyway. It's translating things is always weird. But it's about a brothel in Tokyo in the final days before prostitution was illegalized.
Yeah.
And it's got a story and characters.
Harsh.
and character art.
So,
I mean,
Oedipus Rex doesn't have a
has
story
all
and
those
characters.
things.
You're not happy with the story of Oedipus Rex, basically, is what you're saying. Like the most ancient story in Western culture that this movie does.
Yeah, but you've admitted yourself that the link between that and Oedipus Rex is...
Well, it's...
Also,
sliver thin.
The thing about Oedipus Rex is it was good in its time, but when you look at it now, it's no Breaking Bad, is it?
Ouch.
The other thing is, it's a very superficial retelling of Oedipus. The Oedipus Rex part of this isn't the main plot of the film.
Yeah. I think knowing that it's based on Oedipus Rex is going to stop you from being totally shocked by one late scene, but that's about it.
Any other recommendations to go with it?
My recommendation to go with it is Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Good call, yes.
Which has a very different set of flamboyant drag queens in it, and overall generally quite a different experience and tone, but probably still a few resonant themes, maybe.
And I'm going to listen to what Graham's recommendation is and then nod sagely in agreement.
Well, listeners, you won't be able to see that, but I'm sure it's happening already.
You need to make a sort of creaking sound.
Yes, for your wooden neck.
One day I'll be a real boy. Honest, I will.
Get on with it.
My recommendation is a legendary film that I watched for the first time recently, which is Faster Pussycat Kill Kill by Russ Meyer.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the thing is about Russ Meyer is that on one level he was making sort of cheap softcore films for drive-ins starring women with big boobers because that was his life's obsession.
On one level he was Sid James, so yeah.
He was the Sid James of cinema. But his sensibility is so weird and is so fueled by 50s trash culture of rockabilly and cheap southern melodramas and sort of tough women go-go dancing. What he often ends up producing is a kind of accidental camp. Even though he is perhaps history's most heterosexual filmmaker, his films are intensely camp. And I think with that and with the beautiful black and white. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill is a gorgeous looking film with its fast cutting and comic book angles. I think these two films basically meet in the middle.
Is that the one that Roger Ebert co-wrote?
No, that was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, I think.
I know he was one in that era. It was black and white Russ Meyer movie that he co-wrote.
Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which has a very early role for Pam Grier in.
It kind of casts shadow on his criticisms of movies, doesn't it, when he co-wrote Total Sleaze.
Doesn't
You say cast the shadow, I say brings to a blazing new light.
Doesn't Faster Pussycat Kill Kill also have a mysterious wheelchair in it in some way? Or a mysterious man in a wheelchair?
Oh my god! It does, you're quite right.
I don't know.
Yeah, we've absolutely closed the book on this. Funeral Parade of Roses is the Japanese Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Is that enough, do you think? For our coverage? Do we end on that point?
It's all I've got, so it has to be enough.
I'm surprised you got more than 10 minutes out of it, to be honest. So.
Well, no, I think it was very obvious by about 20 minutes in that it was going to be a source of discussion.
Yeah. On the other hand, I still don't know if we really quite gave an account of the actual film in that, if you see what I mean. I mean, one that would necessarily... Oh, look, I don't know. Let's carry on to something else.
Thanks for checking out one of the podcasts in our merry little family. We really do appreciate it. Podcasts aren't all we do. We also make strides into the world of video. If you like what you've heard and want more, then head on over to YouTube and search for The Geek Show. On our channel, we have video game and low-budget tech reviews, video game chatter in Press X, animation discussions in Keyframe, movie visual essays in Shortcuts, needlessly nerdy lists with Listomania, interviews from our travels, and much, much more. The future's bright, and who knows what else it holds, so don't forget to search for The Geek Show. Subscribe and click that notification bell to stay up to date.
Hello nerds, my name's Josie Long and you're listening to The Geek Show, and I'm going to get your lunch money. I'm not, I really am not. I'm not a bully. If anything, I mean, I'm probably worse than you, at least. Anyway, I've ruined it.
So, if you want to help us continue doing, God, I don't know, whatever the hell that was, there are several ways that you can help out. The first and simplest is that you can leave us a review. Just, pop it on iTunes or Acast or Podbean or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And that does actually help us with algorithms, which, as we've seen in recent UK exam news, are infallible. You can also donate to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show and follow us on social media at TGS_The Geek Show. That's our tag on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Oh, that's what we need to do. Pick out the next director's lottery.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'll do that, yeah.
Yeah, I've got the list open, so I just need a number generated.
Random.org. What's the top number?
274.
Or maybe I shouldn't trust random.org, should I, Mick? Yeah.
Well, maybe.
Well, it doesn't matter, because I won't be on the next Director's Lottery show. So it'll probably be, I don't know, Peter Rogers, George Lucas.
270 what, sorry?
274 is the top number.
Right, let's do a first one just to feel it out, and a second one to get it what he wants. And it's 109.
Okay, 109. Let's do a first one to get rid of the one that Mick would like, and a second one that's... Oh, well, that's quite classy, actually. That's John Ford.
Oh, right.
Right. Okay, I see.
John Ford of My Name's John Ford, I Make Westerns fame. He made a lot of westerns, but he also made plenty of other stuff, like How Green Was My Valley, The Quiet Man, tons of stuff. I reviewed a box set of John Ford films from Indicator, which had like him doing what was that film called? I can't remember. There's one John Ford film which is like a sort of Ealing-esque police drama, which is not something I ever expected to see him do. But obviously The Searchers and Red River and The Iron Horse, My Darling Clementine, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, that's the stuff that he's best known for.
How about we do one of the big ones? We always do like random little obscure things that 6 people have ever seen.
I mean,
Director's Lottery.
I mean, to be fair, John Ford goes right in there. Yeah. But you were going to do a second one, weren't you?
Oh no, he did the first one and kept it to himself, didn't he?
Do you want me to do a second one, just so you've got like a choice?
Oh, no, I don't actually. I think we should go with chance. Sorry, I didn't realise that was the thing.
Oh, well, 159 if you wanted to do that. Just did it again, but sure, yeah.
Okay.
John Ford works.
I'd like the idea of going for the one of the big hitters of John Ford in some way, The Searchers or something. I mean, I was going to say, it's like, can we find anything new to say about it? But on the other hand, that seems like giving in, really. That's too defeatist an attitude. I reckon I probably can find something new to say about The Searchers. I find something new to say. It won't necessarily be accurate,
Right, so that brings us on to our off-the-shelf section, and we have a couple of reissues from Luc Besson on Studio Canal to consider. So does anyone particularly want to go first?
I'll happily start. I was going to talk about The Fifth Element, which is quite a kind of well-remembered film. Came out in about 1997.
Yeah, I think so.
And has a kind of sort of notoriety for being regarded as kind of quite good fun, or a sort of piece of like high camp, almost like a parody, or alternatively being completely terrible and so stupid that it's unbearable.
I've always thought of it as being Blade Runner if Ridley Scott had a sense of humour.
Ouch. Yeah, maybe. I mean, to anyone who's not familiar with this at all, it's a very, very kind of strangely high budget science fiction kind of comedy set in the... Is it set in the distant future? No, I suppose set in the moderately distant future, with Bruce Willis starring as a perplexed cab driver who stumbles into the middle of a kind of massive conspiracy plot to do with a huge alien invasion coming for the Earth and an ancient prophecy of how you prevent that. And has lots of baffling kind of adventures as they travel to whatever the planet was called, I forget, in order to try and prevent the Earth being destroyed by an ancient evil of some kind.
Yeah.
And this stars Bruce Willis, it's got Gary Oldman, it's got Mila Jovovich, it's got Ian Holm, who I think is quite well liked.
Well, yes, absolutely, certainly by me.
Yeah. And it's something where I kind of went into rewatching it with a bit of a sense of dread, thinking, oh God, well, we also know that this has got Chris Tucker as a kind of futuristic DJ who got on everybody's nerves. It was like a kind of comic relief role of the character, but I'll come back to him in a minute. But in the meantime, I mean, this was an unbelievably expensive movie at the time, wasn't it? It had an absolutely massive budget for the time it came out. And it was kind of still in that sort of post Die Hard sort of phase, or where Bruce Willis, like in the 90s, was getting cast in things where he wasn't necessarily that appropriate for them. I don't know. But nevertheless, I went into this thinking, God, this is going to make me absolutely cringe. And I actually genuinely loved it. I thought it was absolutely terrific.
Whoa!
And I'm so surprised that I can't believe that's my opinion. But it's
and so say all of us.
It's kind of pretty much the fault it has is that Chris Tucker is this kind of comic relief character who only becomes irritating with the kind of overdose. It's sort of like they introduce him in the movie, and he's actually quite a funny kind of secondary character they meet as they're travelling around in this movie. And then for some illogical reason, he gets brought along with them for the rest of the adventure, despite the fact he has no role in the story whatsoever. So he probably has about 6 more scenes than he should actually have had, and he could probably have just been edited out a bit with no loss to it whatsoever. But this has characteristics that the whole movie, The Fifth Element, has characteristics that you so kind of seldom see in a kind of high sci-fi movie, apart from in the context of a kind of ironic sort of British comedy, like a Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sort of thing. It has the kind of jokes where, again, it's... You could say the same thing about Ian Holm. You might expect him to just be this kind of funny character. He turns up as a sort of monk or priest who's been guarding this ancient secret, and who is very nervously getting involved in all these galaxy-changing events. And you think, well, he might just turn up as an exposition character who dumps the important information and then lets Bruce Willis get on with the kind of action-adventure side of it. But in fact, he comes along for the whole movie and has continuous kind of funny scenes, rather like a character out of a Terry Gilliam or something like that. And
he's like a cautious Obi-Wan.
Well, not just cautious, actually nervous. Yeah. Nervous, like unsure of how to go about things. But the movie starts in a flashback to the 1920s where some British explorers find an ancient temple containing these mysterious 4-element stones. I think that's what happens, yeah. And there's a prophecy that there's a 5th element, whatever that consists of. Then an alien spaceship promptly turns up with these, to my mind, very, very funny-looking, kind of incompetent ancient alien species who obviously kind of came and influenced human history like the Chariots of the Gods sort of thing. Only they look like big sort of wobbling sort of metal penguins.
They actually reminded me of something more befitting of something like Return to Oz.
Yeah,
they had that kind of feel to them.
Okay, yeah.
Or if anyone is familiar with the aliens in the robed suits from Babylon 5, if you remember that, the Vorlons.
Oh, the Vorlons, yeah.
Like a kind of an incompetent version of the Vorlons who kind of shuffle around in this big kind of headgear thing with a cloth. Anyway, that's what the aliens are up to in the 5th element. They've realised that this gigantic ball of fire, screaming skull, ancient carnivorous alien god thing is heading for Earth. And so every so often this is going to head for Earth, and so every 5,000 years you need to assemble the 5-element stones in order to prevent this from happening. And more or less, Bruce Willis and Ian Holm kind of fall over backwards into the efforts to make this possible in order to save humanity. And Mila Jovovich as well, as the physically incarnated 5th element, as a sort of prophesied, godlike figure who will be an invincible warrior. And pretty much, it has...
Wrapped in John Paul Gaultier bandages.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's another characteristic it's very important to mention, is that it has extremely kind of elaborate, mad costumes done up to in such kind of ridiculous kind of future fashions. It's a lot more kind of brightly coloured, as opposed to something like Blade Runner. In this, pretty much everything is kind of some form of daft, demented children's television sort of outfit. But really, the things, the characteristics that kind of that I'd forgotten about, which I must have been aware of. I must have seen this when it first came out in some way, and had kind of forgotten that it has these characteristics that maybe are actually quite rare in sci-fi films that are done very competently in this, that could actually otherwise be done very lazily, which is kind of things like background sort of storytelling and what I would call world building of the kind of setting of it. The kind of crazy cities that they live in on Earth, and Bruce Willis's job is to be a driver of a flying taxi cab, and he sort of flies around in a hover car, picking people up and dropping them off. And he lives in an apartment where everything is, he lives in a tiny apartment where everything is run by kind of like machines that extend from the walls and that kind of thing. But all of that kind of stuff is an amazing amount of money has been spent on it, and yet it's not kind of forced into the foreground at all. So it seems like an extremely kind of rich and vivid kind of sci-fi world that they live in, where loads of really amazing things just kind of go past you at such high speed as you're watching it. So one of the better examples is that the villain of the piece is Gary Oldman, more or less, as this evil, sort of evil billionaire Zorg, who for some reason he's a billionaire arms dealer or something like that, with control over a gigantic transplanetary corporation. And he wants to help the force of evil destroy the Earth as just like a general sort of agent of chaos, pretty much. I don't think he's given...
his vibe.
Yeah, he just doesn't... there's not much more reason given for it than that. And Gary Oldman does a very good job being this kind of evil, yet also incompetent character. Although it has that... it has a one or two scenes where he makes contact with this mysterious, evil, fiery death god or whatever it is that's heading for Earth. That's pretty much just a manifestation of pure evil, and there's no more explanation given for it than that. And he makes contact with it as this kind of evil presence, rather like sort of glancing at Sauron in The Lord of the Rings. You know, you have a sudden kind of horrible psychic moment of seeing this thing. And you have one scene in that where Gary Oldman's head starts bleeding spontaneously when he's on the phone to this thing, and it's not exactly giving him instructions. I don't think you actually hear a voice, but in some way he's made a connection with it. But almost nothing is actually made of that aspect. Like I say, they pretty much worked out that you just have an image of a giant screaming skull in space heading for Earth. That's really as much kind of menace as you need, that the world's just going to be destroyed in a totally unspecified way. And I wonder if they'd arrived at the same sort of idea as you sometimes see in the Marvel Universe movies, of saying, with this kind of movie, with the sort of tone you're going for, you can actually kind of get away without a villain to some extent. You don't need a complicated villain necessarily. And it's sort of like if there's one thing in the movie that you need to kind of slightly push into the background, you can get away with it to some extent with the villain. It probably wouldn't necessarily work with the heroes or the sidekicks or the kind of backstory, but with villains, they do try and do it. So it's got Gary Oldman in it sort of as just another kind of wandering adventurer character who blunders through the ludicrous events of this movie. And it's got, in a way, a surprisingly kind of simple plot, which is pretty much just that they discover there's this prophecy. So they go to this planet where they've got to get hold of the mystic stones that allow them to fulfill it. And they have lots of absurd adventures along the way. And then they go back to Earth in order to actually fulfill the prophecy and make sure the world is saved. And aside from that, there's just so much stuff that goes past at high speed, like ridiculously dressed, what would you say, kind of hostesses on this giant floating cruise ship that they go and visit. There's like a sort of Titanic-style disaster where everyone has to board lifeboats. Yeah. Sorry, did anyone else watch this recently as part of this reissue? I don't know if anyone's got...
I watched it.
Anyone got a different opinion than me?
No, I think you're doing an able job of synopsizing. Yeah. You've got the stones being transported by an undercover agent who's a diva opera singer alien.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Well,
but there's just so much crazy stuff that's just
the best cover. Just
used for one scene, like the fact that Bruce Willis's apartment where he lives in whatever it is, New York, has has a kind of sideways facing window that just looks out over the vast kind of abyss from the 300,000th floor or whatever of the sort of space hover highways with loads and loads of cars going past at different altitudes. And he has a drop-off from a visit from the local butcher and fishmonger who comes along in a kind of flying junk sort of thing, pulls up at his window in order to sell him food and then disappears off again. Likewise, he gets a visit from the army who want him to rejoin the army so they can go and help him, so he can go and help with his mission. And some of the army get locked in his fridge because he's got an automatic fridge or something like that. There's a gun with homing bullets where you fire the first bullet at somebody, and then all the bullets you fire after that will zoom towards the same person. So there's also a gun which is a kind of flamethrower. It has like a big tribe of these shape-shifting kind of orc type characters who go around being the villain's minions, and they don't really achieve anything. I mean, they're pretty much just there to cause trouble, which is to attack with guns.
Well, that's the other thing with Zorg, isn't it? He seems to have 2 or 3 bands of rival mercenaries all trying to achieve the same aim for him.
Yeah.
And they all keep either getting in each other's way or cocking up in ever-increasing levels of severity.
But Zorg himself is hopelessly incompetent as a villain, despite his appearance of being extremely cunning. It's sort of like, he tries to get hold of the magic stones at one point, and they accidentally deliver him an empty box. So he goes and he finally takes the matters in his own hands and goes and gets hold of the stones himself, accidentally stealing another empty box instead, and then getting shot at with his own guns and coming close to being blown up with his own bomb. Well, I think he actually does get blown up, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, he's sort of the villain of the piece, but on the other hand, it's not really clear that the heroes even have much awareness of him, really, It's kind of like he just blunders through such a preposterous set of conflicts. I mean, the other thing is they obviously wanted it to...
Wile E. Coyote of the future.
Yeah. Ian Holm is in it as a brilliant secondary character of this nervous priest who is forced to try and fulfill this gigantic stakes kind of prophecy, which partly involves trying to steal the fifth element or kidnap Lilo, who is Mila Jovovich's character, who is the fifth element. who they eventually realise he stows away in the landing gear of the spacecraft or something like that in order to get between planets. I don't know. There's just a lot of ridiculous stuff like that goes on in it. They technically are fake awarded winning a competition on the radio to get a trip to the outer space cruise ship to make it possible to steal back the components from the opera singer. Or I don't know if any of that sounds
like... the competition's been rigged by his former military bosses.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So if any of that sounds like it appeals, you also get lots of preposterous stuff along the way, like they pass through customs, and there has to be all the things where they have to, fake their IDs in order to, and go past all like the customs checkpoints and stuff in order to travel to this planet, which they don't even really want to go to exactly, but they're kind of forced into doing it. And it more or less just kind of clips along nicely with that kind of ridiculous stuff. I mean, it's obvious that there was an idea that this would be a proper kind of action movie as well. Hence, you got Bruce Willis in the main role, and there are some really brutal kind of shootout scenes where you couldn't exactly. It's not one of those films that's got kind of like gory violence in it, but on the other hand, it does have in a way quite a lot of killing, which is that he fights against like squads of these sort of hairy alien orc things and wins and mows them down with machine guns. And also he carries out the kind of stunts that you saw in Die Hard, more or less, which is suddenly he leaps off a balcony and there's a big explosion behind him, So it's quite kind of cursory, the extent of, how that's integrated, really. They just thought, there's half a dozen things from Die Hard, let's just do those again, but in space. Probably just to try and attract an audience who would not necessarily be attracted to just the kind of slapstick sci-fi thing.
I think the thing with it is if you're a fan of overblown farcical space opera, you've probably already seen it.
Yeah.
And if you're not, what is wrong with you?
But in a way, I ended up kind of liking it a lot more than something else that had a lot of the same sort of attempt at creating an amazingly kind of rich sci-fi world. Like, for example, whatever the sequel to Blade Runner was called that they did comparatively recently.
Blade Runner 2049, which was actually the runtime.
Yes, I was going to say, named after the number of hours it takes to watch.
Blade Runner 2049, which has a lot of the same kind of crazy world-building and design stuff, just played all together kind of po-faced and seriously, as opposed to in The Fifth Element, where they just think a lot of it is funny, and in my view are correct.
But ironically, in Blade Runner 2049, they did a lot of world building that was completely unnecessary because Ridley Scott had already done it.
Yeah, and also, when we talk about Blade Runner 2049 as being humorless, we're forgetting what a thigh-slapping laugh riot Jared Leto's performance was.
Yeah, right, yes. That doesn't count. Although, again, like I say...
in terms of overblown space opera, Luc Besson has produced both my favourite and my least favourite elements of the entries in the genre in this and the dire adaptation that was Valerian.
Well, that gives us a bit of a pivot point because you were quite blindsided by Valerian, weren't you, Mick? Because you did not expect to hate a Luc Besson film.
I did not. When I go into a Luc Besson film, and the best thing I can say about it was, well, Rihanna's performance wasn't bad.
Yes.
So that would be my summary on The Fifth Element would be if you remember it being at all dodgy or something, I urge you to give it another try. Though the thing about it with Chris Tucker is, everyone remembers him being irritating, and you probably will still find him irritating, but he didn't spoil the experience at all. I mean, the whole thing overall is just ludicrous, but on the other hand, never stops moving for long enough for you to actually worry about it.
Rewatch it. And then imagine the Chris Tucker role being played by the original person that they wanted to play that role, but who turned it down.
Who was?
Who?
Prince.
Oh, wow.
Well, okay. Yeah.
That's very strange. Yeah, okay.
There is you could say, like I say, it sort of lacks any relationship between the villain and the actual heroes because there's not really any need for them to interact all that much. And it also has that it's got the main romantic leads, which is Bruce Willis and Milla Jovovich as Corbin Dallas and Leeloo, the Fifth Element, together, have a kind of romance in the film. They sort of fall in love with each other, apparently, which you get at the end. And it's like, yeah, that makes absolutely no sense because they barely have time for a conversation in the course of the movie. And yet pretty much just kind of, embrace for the romantic kiss at the end. And it's like, yeah, they've only just met pretty much by running into each other by chance. And since then have had no opportunity to stop running in and out of rooms being pursued by crazy creatures and machines.
But if that's not a bonding...
Okay, so Mick, you've also been watching a Luc Besson movie,
sorry.
isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, that segue I had 20 minutes ago. Mick,
So next up on our Milla Jovovich double bill,
yes,
is The Messenger, which is kind of the story of Joan of Arc, but also kind of not. This is the kind of historical epic that I would avoid like the plague, generally. Until you see at the bottom of the Blu-ray case, directed by Luc Besson.
Which would at least you'd expect something a bit out of the ordinary, wouldn't you? I mean, as opposed to just the kind of standard sort of.
Absolutely.
yeah.
And then when you read on that Charles VII is played by John Malkovich.
Wowzers.
What?
I hope he's doing a French accent.
And Yolande of Aragon is played by Faye Dunaway.
Right.
The 90s were a hell of a decade.
And a character called The Conscience is played by Dustin Hoffman.
I don't know. This isn't the stuff that would necessarily fill me with confidence, to be honest, having not seen this. It's the kind of thing where it
fills me with confusion.
Yeah. But it's also well, we've got a load of medieval European characters, and obviously we're just casting a load of A-list American actors to play them.
Au contraire. They're not just A-list American actors, because you've also got Tyneside sweetheart Gina McKee as the Duchess of Bedford.
I love Gina McKee.
Timothy West plays Pierre Cochon.
Right.
So it's a good job that this is the film where Milla Jovovich brought her acting chops.
Mm-hmm. She has acting chops?
I'm assuming she does. I personally cannot comment on her performances in Resident Evil 1 through 97.
That's why I made that comment, because I have, and performances, really? She has that in her?
But I think Milla Jovovich is a bit like a Premiership football team. She can only act against what you put her in front of.
Oh, thank God you said that rather than she is secretly owned by a Russian oligarch.
Let's not completely rule that out, though. she's good fun in The Fifth Element. She's got the same as good comic timing as anyone else in The Fifth Element.
Yeah, and
you've had your review.
No, but he's right. Milla Jovovich, she co-created the language that Leeloo speaks in Fifth Element, and here she is absolutely the measure of pretty much everybody else that she shares screen time with.
Fair play.
We get the typical story of Joan of Arc leading the French against the English, becoming a martyr of the 100 Years' War, but from a typically different Luc Besson angle.
Okay.
Because what we also see is her having doubts about whether the visions she's heard are from God, or just voices in her head of the kind that should get her burnt at the stake as a witch. She's not sure whether she's divine or mad. And that's what tips it from just being another historical drama. It absolutely draws on that historical story, and it draws on the actual accounts that we have of the time, of the wounds that she received in the battles she received them. It takes a few liberties with the timing of certain events, but the key story points of Joan of Arc's career are in there.
Yeah.
She spots the Dauphin in a crowd when he's trying to obscure his presence, even though someone else pretends to be him. She receives arrow wounds to the chest and to the leg. So all those plot beats are there. There's a typical sort of attention to detail of the world building, so you get to understand about the betrayals and treachery of the various French provinces during the campaigns, the court intrigue amongst the church and who are in fact the legal council as well at the time.
Yeah.
And it's while she's in her cell that she has these conversations with the Conscience, played by Dustin Hoffman, and that's where you get this whole: was she receiving messages from God, or was she completely insane?
Yeah.
And it's a 158 minutes long.
Yeah.
What? Okay.
That's not an unusual runtime for a big historical.
No, I suppose not.
No, I mean it lasts slightly longer than the 100 Years' War did, but it's not a slow movie by any manner of means. There's a lot of dialogue, but it's not just pointless exposition dialogue.
Yeah.
There's some excellent interplay between Jovovich and Malkovich. Faye Dunaway's character she's like Wicked Witch of the West without being a witch, or indeed particularly wicked.
Right.
But,
so like the
yeah. But she sort of evolves over the. What Faye Dunaway does is she portrays that typical sort of medieval woman behind the throne, the one who wields the power. She's the one actually making the decisions for France.
Yeah.
She just can't enact them because John Malkovich is the Dauphin.
Yeah, you know what Malkovich is like.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a historical epic, but don't watch it thinking it's going to be like an Open University lecture in cinema form. It's a stunning. There's some fantastic effects sequences when she's having visions. There's some quite graphic medieval weaponry violence. And it's just gorgeous to look at, really well performed. It's re-established my faith in Luc Besson.
Oh, be careful now! Be careful.
After he desecrated Valerian.
Because there's Luc Besson when he cares, and there's Luc Besson when he doesn't.
Well, apparently he cares about Valerian. That's the worry.
That's a weird thing, yeah.
Wait, when did he make
Valerian?
Valerian?
Another movie he did recently, one he did in France called The Adventures of Adele Blanc-Sec, and that was like, oh, that's where you've been, Luc Besson. That was fun. I'd recommend that, by the way. That is one of his more
I did enjoy that
exciting ones, yeah.
Adele Blanc-Sec, yeah, that was quite good fun, as I recall. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it was like a sort of Luc Besson has a go at doing Indiana Jones, but with a girl in the lead.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, next week we've got something that I haven't been able to say for quite a while, which is new films at the cinema and everything.
What, really?
Yes. Now, coming out on Wednesday the 26th of August, so probably the day when you're going to be listening to this, we have Christopher Nolan's Tenet. Careful
now, he might delay it again.
Yeah, I realise I've jinxed it by saying that, but at time of recording, we have got Tenet. Now, I'm not saying that everything else is running away from Tenet, but on the more conventional Friday, the big release is a Latvian animation.
Okay.
It's going to be a tough call for that box office weekend.
Yeah.
How would you run away from something which is running away? This is really hard for people to counter program, isn't it?
Yes. In fairness, it has been quite well reviewed. It's called Away, a real labour of love by its debutant director Gintzil Balosis. We also have the new film from Mikhail Hasnavikas, him What Did the Artist?
And fell off the side of the earth almost instantly after it.
Yeah, I never watched that Godard biopic he did because I suspect it'll make me want to punch things. But his new film, The Lost Prince, starring Omar Sy and Berenice Bejo, is out on Friday. But, I mean, you know what we're doing, right?
If all goes well.
if all goes well, if God is willing and the creek doesn't rise and there isn't like a meteor or some shit.
You're doing the Latvian animation, aren't you?
Actually tempted to do that, but no, let's be honest.
But let's be honest, we are doing tennis and we are greatly looking forward to it. So until then, that's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica for the week. I've been Graham.
I've been Tim.
I've been Mike.
And I've been Rob.
See you next week.